This is Dr. Thomas Klein. I'm a physician in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a generalist. I have taken care of babies weighing 3 pounds. I've taken care of newborns, children, adults, teenagers, older kids, people in their 40s, 50s, and my patient recently was 100. So I've had broad experience with people of all ages. And I am here today to talk to you as a younger audience about some new findings we have come up with at JATH Educational Research Consortium about drugs. Don't you just love to hear talks about drugs? We could have a talk about sex, but that's already been done. We are at the point, talking about drugs, that people were at in the 1960s talking about sex. And the topics in high schools at that time, including high school I went to, was just don't have sex. Then there won't be any problems. This kind of goes way back to some government officials about drugs who felt if there was educational materials about drugs, people would start using them. So they just felt like if you don't tell people about it, they won't use drugs. That's pretty ignorant. So we're going to talk about drugs, but from a different standpoint. I'll have some little comments along the way. Our position is educational. We're not telling people to do things, not do things. We're providing information. I'll give you an example. No one that we know of has ever died from smoking marijuana. We do know there's some recent problems with Adderall that I'd like to give you my experience on. One of them, about 25 years ago, truckers used to be able to stop into truck stops and buy amphetamines in order to stay awake. It was called Benzedrine. Came little inhalers and would keep them awake. And it did keep them awake. But what they discovered was it was an illusion. They were awake, but they were just as bad with their reaction times as they were without the Benzedrine. So it created the illusion of, wow, I feel great, I can do anything. And they couldn't. And that's why they made them illegal. It was legal for a while. They made them illegal because the truck drivers all felt like they were fine. They were getting into accidents about at the same rate as people who did not take Benzedrine. Adderall is dextroamphetamine. Same thing. All of these drugs, stimulants, are related to your own adrenaline. Adrenaline is your body's fight or flight hormone that you use when a bear is chasing you or whatever is chasing you. So the drugs that we're studying are mainly opioids. Now, what's an opioid? It's actually a opiate. That's a bad word for it. Opiate pain medicine. Opiate pain medicines are our oldest painkillers, going back 4,000 years. It's natural. It's just stuff that oozes out of plants. And you can take it directly off the plant, put it in your mouth. It will relieve your pain. That's pretty amazing. But we developed a problem in this country around the turn of the century, around 1900. And you have to understand, in 1900, women, like in this audience, did not go to high school. They stayed home. They were put on perches. This was the Victorian era. They wore long dresses. They didn't go shopping. They sent somebody shopping. Their goal in life was to find a rich husband. The men in the world were looking for rich, chaste women. So Randolph Hearst, the great newspaper mogul, around the turn of the century, who really did not like Chinese people at all, thought they all had to be shipped back to China, yellow hordes, he called them, found out that white women were going to opium dens. Now, opium dens were places where people went like bars, and they smoked opium, and they got super relaxed. So it was kind of like a relaxation parlor. Well, Randolph Hearst got wind of the fact that white women were going to these opium dens, losing their virtue, and running off with Chinese opium den owners. This was not true. Chinese men do not want to run off with white women. So he made it up. So it started to get into the fabric of our culture that opium products, or opioids, caused moral decay. That's pretty bad, especially if you're protecting white women under the codes of the Victorian era. They shouldn't be out anyway. What are they doing? So it kind of went downhill from there. The government tried to control opium products because of this moral problem. In 1909, they passed the first law to try to raise tax on opium products, which just drove people to the street. They finished it off in 1914 with the Heroin Act, trying to also control opium products, and that's when the first heroin appeared. So, based on our research, we've come up with the fact that there's two groups of addictions. One, we call type 1, is marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, and stimulants. But we have a new definition. The definition is involvement with substance or activity that ruins your daily life. So I knew of somebody that was smoking marijuana around the clock and selling it in order to get enough to use, and it ruined his daily life. He was trying to go to college. He couldn't go because he was busy smoking weed the whole time. Is he addicted? Yes, by our definition, it ruined his daily life. Somebody who comes home at night and drinks 6 beers and collapses and then goes to work the next day, is that an addiction? Is it ruining that person's life? Whatever you decide, that's the definition. So this group, this type 1 group of addictions, and you're learning this for the first time. This is new information. This group, group 1, basically people are taking are using substances to the point that's ruining their daily life. They could stop if they wanted to, but they don't want to. This stuff is working for them. The problem is that these are unregulated medicines. They're on the streets in various doses. Makes it a little bit dicey. All of this type 1 group can stop the medicine they're taking on the streets, or pharmacological agents, whatever you want to call them, because most all of them are medications, can stop without any withdrawal symptoms. That's type 1. So you're learning this. This is brand new. Now, type 2 is the hard-wired addictions, and there's 3 of them. 1, nicotine. And by the way, blowing nicotine is only half the danger of cigarettes. 1/2 the danger is lung cancer. You won't get lung cancer if you're vaping. The other half is elevated blood pressure, increased strokes, increased heart attacks. Those things continue any form of nicotine that you take. This type 2 addictions are impossible to stop. First one is nicotine, second one are opiates, and the third is 5% of alcoholics. That's only a very small number of alcoholics. These are the alcoholics that can't leave the house because they need to have alcohol within 30 minutes. They need a continuous supply. So they're different than the person who buys a case of beer and passes out on the weekend and goes to work Monday and doesn't have any more alcohol until the next weekend. So let's get back to opiates. Opiates cause a biochemical, brain-related receptor addiction that's different than the other ones. Opiate addiction is actually genetic. And we've been working on this for a long time, and there are people that really have a hard time with this. In other words, this type of addiction runs in families. So how do you know? Well, pretty soon there's going to be some tests that you can find out. You can check the genes. If you have a family with alcoholics and people with serious drug problems, then you may be carrying the gene. How do we know it's possibly genetic? Well, we've been talking to, in our group, people with true heroin disease that are in recovery, and we asked them an important question. What was it like when you took your first opiate? Now, this could be heroin, 7% of the time it's heroin, oxycodone, the whole host of, everybody knows what these are, Vicodin. We asked them what it was like when you took the first pill, and all 27 said they went to the moon. Now, wait a minute. It's supposed to take a long period of time to become addicted to these things, which is true of type 1 group. Over a long period of time, you can get to the point where it ruins your daily life. But this type 2 group is different. First pill, you go to the moon? That's telling us something. And what it's telling us and our research friends at JATH is that, whoa, this may be an actual hardcore genetic disease. So then we went to the research and to people that do what we call bench research. This is, they're in labs and they have mice and they do that kind of stuff. And there's 700 papers out there about abnormalities of a gene, even though which one it is. A118G is an allele on a larger gene. So why haven't anybody come across this idea? Because once you set up a crisis, and the crisis is set up on the wrong information, then facts don't count anymore. It becomes a thing in itself. So people have decided that drugs cause addiction, and that's it. They're not going to listen to anything else, and so we just get drugs off the street and we'll be fine. Well, they've been trying that for 100 years. 1925, they outlawed heroin. That didn't seem to work too well. So what it actually is addiction causes drug use. So you have to come at the addiction problem before you can develop the solutions. So back to our opiates and this mysterious thing about them being genetic. It turns out, if you look at the total number of people with heroin addiction today, and it turns out to be about 4 people per 1,000, and you go back to 1920 and you compare it, it's also 4 per 1,000. I have statistics now for the number of heroin addicts in the world. Guess what? 4 per 1,000. In Canada, 4 per 1,000. In Switzerland, where they've just fixed the drug laws, 4 per 1,000. So how can a disease have the same prevalence, we call it, which is total number of people with the disease, if it varies according to what you read in the newspaper, if it varies according to environmental situations? Too many drugs on the street, send the police out, arrest doctors for giving this stuff out, arrest people for using it. Because the substance causes addiction, they believe. We spent $1 trillion, according to the Library of Congress Research Service, and it appears that we've gotten nowhere. That's kind of a lot. The reason we haven't gotten anywhere is because People don't understand there's two kinds of addiction. And people don't understand that opiate addiction or heroin addiction is genetic. So, why am I here? I am here to try to prevent people from having serious opiate heroin addiction and dying. I heard last year in one of our high schools here with 1,000, or a couple years ago, 1,000 kids, 4 kids died. Boy, that's right on the number, 4 per 1,000. So it's easy to self-diagnose a person with genetic heroin disease, not with the other ones, just opiates. Because the first opiate you take, you're going to go to the moon. This is the terminology used by a doctor I know at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, one of the best hospitals in the world. When he was 30-something, he took a Vicodin for sore elbow or something. Somebody gave it to him. A doctor gave it to him. Went to the moon. Couldn't stop. Ruined his career for 5 years. Now he's back being a doctor. But he has the disease. He has the genetic disease, and it's permanent. So this is why you hear stories of people relapsing all the time, ending up on the streets. So how do you not end up on the street? Do you prevent this genetic disease? No, you can't. Just like you can't prevent the genetic disease of diabetes or of hemophilia or lots of other genetic diseases. You can't prevent that. But if you take one oxycodone or one Vicodin, it doesn't matter where you get it, from a doctor, wherever, and you go to the moon, you've just diagnosed yourself, and you've got to stop immediately. Because here's what happens. One person I talked to said that when he was 14, he took an oxycodone, and it was so wonderful, he didn't want anybody else to find out about it. So he ended up on the streets as a heroin addict for 15 years, and he's been off now for 13 years. His life was ruined. You don't have to have your life ruined if you have this disease. It's kind of like diabetes. Just because you have diabetes, your life doesn't have to be ruined. You can treat it. So what doctors need to do, here's the biggie, what doctors need to do, what you need to do, what everybody needs to do is when you are going to take an opiate, no matter, like I said, where you get it, doctor, wherever, here's the question. Have you ever had an opiate before? If this is your first time, then you run a 0.5% chance you're carrying the bad genes. And so if you're getting ready to take a Vicodin or an oxycodone, you make sure somebody's with you that can verify if you've gone to the moon. It is not normal to go to the moon with opiates. It is with marijuana and cocaine. All of those in the type 1 group, you will go to the moon. Not as much as with opiates if you have the disease. But it is not normal when you take an opiate to go to the moon. 994 people out of 1,000, when they take an opiate, they're either going to get sick or drowsy or feel weird. They are not going to have an experience that people describe as going to the moon. So what do you do if a friend of yours, for whatever reason, has taken an opiate pill and they're over in the corner going, wow, you know what? Everybody in the world needs to take this stuff. This is unbelievable. That person probably has genetic opiate addiction, which we call mu receptor, because it's the receptor in the brain. For all of you who've gotten through biology, you know about receptors. There's receptors for opiates, and it plugs in. It's the ligand. Only the structure of the receptor is genetically wrong. So when it plugs in, instead of getting a little bit of dopamine and flushing and feeling good like you do with your own endorphins, it goes wild. Something is wrong. So, key question, have you ever had an opiate before? Now, suppose you've had opiates before and they made you sick, or you had the normal response, got drowsy. then you will never, ever addict to opiates. We have not found a single case of people developing opiate addiction after they've been taking opiates for a while for their pain or whatever. So you've just been engendered with some new news. And we have Jonelle Eljaway with us today. And she's been popping in from time to time during this video. And she had a good experience when she was in junior high school about students becoming teachers for things. And she will explain that to you. And if you have any questions, you can ask them, because we are going to be here live with this presentation. And if you have questions, you can email Jonelle. She will give you her email. And we can also answer questions privately. So, thank you, and over to Jonelle.